Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's Geek Franchise Animated Show special, we will be looking at how things played out in alternative universes in What If Season 3 from Marvel, and then rising through the ranks of Starfleet in the final season of Star Trek Lower Decks. But before those animated shows, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Unusually for me, I am actually going to talk about a recent prose book that I've read, although it is still somewhat within the usual parameters, as this is The Great When, the new novel by Alan Moore, famed writer of, comics such as Watchmen and also the novel Jerusalem, which I read and possibly talked about on this podcast a few years back. It takes place in London 1949, shortly after, a few years after the end of the Second World War, in which London is still putting itself back together, and one directionless young man called Dennis Knuckleyard, which is a good name, is stuck in a dead-end job in a bookshop when he accidentally stumbles across a secret London beneath the real one, where in some ways, the platonic forms of what makes London itself lurk in a terrifying way. And he stumbles around the city, slowly encountering some of the people who live in this strange other London and trying and failing to avoid getting sucked into it. And it's... as you might better guess from the synopsis, it's a very classic London urban fantasy. There's quite a few books like this in the world. I've read a few of them. But yeah, this is a good one. It's not as, ambitiously weird and literary as his previous novel, Jerusalem, which I also read and enjoyed. And that's a really strange, trippy book about the entire history of Northampton and all the mysticism around it. Whereas this, it's fairly straightforward, but it's very, very well written. It's got a very evocative turn of phrase. It's got a nice sense of humour as well. Alan Moore's in a bit of a playful mood this time. There's quite a few good chuckles here. It's a fun book.
That does sound very interesting, yeah. And as you said on the podcast before, there are no original ideas, there's only original execution. And Alan Moore's someone I always trust to have an original execution. But yeah, this does sound like an interesting read. To what degree is it sort of play up the urban fantasy? Are we more in magical realism territory here, or something closer to, Rivers of London?
Well, it's meant to be the first book in a 5-book series, and so far he's kind of playing his cards a bit close to his chest. I think we're probably going to get into sort of Rivers of London territory. I think there is actually meant to be a cosmology here, but because that's the sort of thing Alan Moore likes, I think his magic is very much from a place of it's a sort of natural, uncontrollable force, and if you try to control it, it'll fuck you up. So he's not as keen to make it a sort of defined scientific system as they perhaps are in Rivers of London sometimes. So yeah, I think we're going a bit more towards the Rivers of London direction, but I think it might take a while to get there. I think it's always going to be a bit more sort of mysterious and strange.
Yeah, maybe something a bit more like David Lynch, Twin Peaks style. A world that clearly has magic in it, but it's sort of bizarre and inexplicable.
Maybe. There's this sort of other world, as I say, which he can step into. And generally, the pattern seems to be that as soon as you step foot in that other world, things just go really, really weird. And at the moment in this first book, the other world seems very baffling and bizarre and strange. But I suspect as we get through the series, it might become a bit more familiar to us. But who knows? Ask me again after I've read book 5, which I'm guessing will be at least 5 or so years from now.
So there's the sort of plutonic forms of London. That sounds like an interesting concept. I'm not exactly sure how that would play out. Is it like, the sort of platonic form of the Tube or places in London or things like that?
Kind of seems like it's both. I haven't fully delved into the Tube yet, but there's a few platonic forms of places, and he's also met this guy who's meant to be the platonic form of London crime or London criminals or something. You've seen similar things, I guess, in various books. Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere, I know. Possibly not the best time to cite Neil Gaiman, has a lot of characters who are like the embodiment of London landmarks in a slightly more literal way. But yeah, it's always been an appealing source to urban fantasy writers, I guess, this idea of a secret world below London, the sort of place that apparently encourages that.
Yeah, there's lots of books about the mysticism of London. As you say, we mentioned Rivers of London, Neverwhere is another one. I always thought one of the most interesting ones on this is The City in the City, although it says in the book that it's set in Eastern Europe. I think one of the most interesting takes on Shiny Melville's novel was written by Laurie Penny when she said it's clearly a metaphor for London. 2 cities on top of each other, the rich and the poor, the divided city. So again, there's always lots of, creative and imaginative takes on what London could be. It's a city that has inspired writers, for a very long time. Dickens, Tom Hardy, many, many others. So yeah, I guess Alan Moore's working in a noble tradition.
Yeah, and I think there's very much a class element here, as I guess there often is if you're doing this sort of book about English society. The idea of the less well-off classes being the ones who move through this sort of spirit of London, and then the richer people are sort of squatting on top of it because they can't be trusted to come near it.
Yeah, there's an obvious analogy there. But yeah, it does sound like an interesting one. I know a lot of Alan Moore's writing does have like sort of social commentary elements to it, so it's good that he's still got that political edge in his writing.
Yeah, as they all say, Alan Moore knows the score. Yeah, another good book from Alan Moore. As I say, not quite as toweringly ambitious and weird as Jerusalem, but still a good fun read, and yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. I'm looking forward to the second one.
I guess it's only the first part of a series, so give it time to get weird and and ambitious, I suppose.
Well, yeah, Jerusalem was basically a series in itself. It originally, famously, was published as basically a 3-book box set. It's basically a trilogy. Maybe by the time we've read the whole series of the Long London Quintet, I believe it's called, it'll be just as strange as Jerusalem was.
Sounds good.
So yeah, that's me. What have you been up to?
Well, it's another strange piece of media, then it's just strange in a different way, which is I went to see the film Better Man, which is a biopic of Robbie Williams, singer, dancer, pop star, media personality. But yeah, it's got a slight gimmick to it, which is rather than just being a straight up story of his life with, you know, his songs scattered in as musical numbers. In this, Robbie Williams is played by a CGI monkey.
Obviously.
And yeah, as you'd expect. And yeah, it's never commented on, it's never addressed. There are no other monkeys, like his parents are regular people. So yeah, it's a bit of an odd film, shall we say, but you know, it's quite good. I thought this could be just a sort of 90s pop nostalgia with a sort of gimmick thrown in, but it does make him come across quite relatable. It is one of those sort of harrowing stories about the toils and perils of fame, in that, yeah, you know, from a deprived background, starved of love and attention, then, you know, becoming famous very quickly, becoming very successful, and then getting hooked on drugs and drink and all the things like that, as well as obviously being hooked on the ultimate drug of fame and attention. But yeah, and it kind of actually does, I don't know, tell quite a moving story that makes you, you know, very sympathetic. There's good use of the songs to kind of punctuate key emotional moments. So for a film that I had in some ways low expectations of, it did actually manage to surprise me.
Yeah, I did hear this was meant to be decent, and as you say, the monkey thing did make it sound interesting. I have a sort of lingering nostalgia for, like, I don't know if it's Robbie Williams himself or just some of his earlier hits that came out while I was still sort of paying attention to pop music.
Yeah, I was surprised by how much of the soundtrack that I knew, partly because I think most of the songs are taken from his most popular era, which was kind of the period when I would just spend hours and hours sat in front of MTV or The Box, if anyone remembers that British music selector channel where you could call or text in and then they'd play a video from a carousel. And it'd just be music videos all day. And yeah, and there was a lot of Robbie Williams at the time, you know, alongside more credible stuff from the area, such as, you know, the Oasis singles of the time, or Block Party, or things like that, where we had to sit through all the pop music to get to the indie stuff. But yeah, I was surprised by how much of the songs I knew that they dropped in. I'm not particularly nostalgic for his music myself, but there is some good other bits of 90s nostalgia. There is a pretty good scene involving Oasis, which I enjoyed very much.
Do they play themselves?
No, they don't play themselves kneecap style. However, they have found some people who are pretty good ringers for Noel and Liam. Although I guess, yeah, between the hair and the glasses and the attitude, that kind of is most of the performance.
So yeah, as I say, I haven't seen this. I have seen other recent music biopics like Rocket Man, and I think I saw some of the Freddie Mercury one. So yeah, I do find the trend of actual biopics of recent or even still performing musicians kind of strange in a way, but I guess we've reached a point where some of these people have been around long enough that there's enough to fashion a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, Elton John, his career goes back a lot further and there's a lot more to cover. I would say Rocket Man's a better film, and they are very, very similar films in that, yeah, it's got basically all the same emotional beats of kind of deprived background, lots and lots of talent, seeks attention, becomes a successful musician, gets lost in the world of fame, drugs, rock and roll, alienates people closest to him, goes to a dark place, you know, happy ending. So yeah, and you know, to be honest, Rocket Man is probably like a better film. This one has the monkey gimmick, which I suppose is what makes it's not really a gimmick, makes it different. I was surprised by how quickly you kind of get over the monkey thing, and you just kind of really get invested in the story of Robbie the chimpanzee and his roller coaster through fame. It is weird how quickly you overlook that. I mean, it's quite an interesting use of this sort of bizarre CGI effect in that it means you can always see him in any scene, and it's sort of, you know, obviously an elaborate visual metaphor that he's a performing monkey. There's a bit when he talks about your personality gets set when you become famous, and he became famous when he's 15, so he feels less evolved than other people. There's also there's a whole bit because he's haunted by his insecurities. Whenever he looks out into an audience and is performing, he sees versions of himself kind of heckling him and telling him that he's rubbish and he's no good. And there are always other versions of the Robbie-Williams-monkey character, which means in an audience of thousands of people, you can always see the monkeys mocking him. Another good way of kind of highlighting, using a visual element to tell this metaphor of he can't escape his demons even when he's like at the peak of his fame. So it does actually work bizarrely well as a thing, and it is more than a gimmick.
Yeah. As I say, one day I'll feel a rush of nostalgia for my late childhood, early teens era, and I'll stick this on, and I imagine I might feel something for a few minutes.
Yeah, it's very, very moving. Things like that was very moving. And it does make you very sympathetic for Robbie Williams, and really feel he's from a very deprived background. He's been through a lot, some of it his own doing, some of it the drug that is fame. I do feel that, I don't know, it's difficult. Although it is a good movie and that it, you get a strong emotional reaction from it and there's a good story and character to get invested in. It's not particularly original movie. Like I said, it's very similar to Rocket Man. It does kind of feel that it's kind of in some level repackaging things that have happened before or you've seen before, which is kind of odd because I also kind of in some ways feel that about Robbie Williams music in that there, obviously, there's famous songs and they're good ones for bringing people together if you want to have that shared connection to other people for people of our generation, especially if your taste is slightly more mainstream than mine. But he is just kind of repackaging previous pop stars, their art in kind of a new form, not really doing anything original. This film is kind of the same. Robbie Williams isn't a new Sinatra. This film isn't a new A Star Is Born. But it isn't bad, and it's good. It's just that's, I guess, my primary criticism of it.
But you don't really like Robbie Williams, so you don't really like a film about him.
Well, I kind of preferred the film, actually, to his music.
Oh, fair enough.
Because the film has a great story and an emotional character you can get invested in, and any good story can get you invested in any character or situation. We talked about Tetris, a really tense film about the bureaucratic process of extracting video game rights from the Soviet Union. On paper, dull as fuck, but between character and execution, your emotional investment, it comes across really well. So I guess I'm just not that emotionally invested in Robbie Williams' music. Again, it kind of tickles the nostalgia for me, but again, the Oasis music of that period is probably what I relate to more, and other Britpop or kind of this early wave of indie bands. I mentioned Block Party and whatever. You're not hugely invested in his music, but I can get invested in this film, and on the basis of this is a character, and I'm invested in the character and the story it's telling. So I guess that's the basis I'm kind of recommending it. Unless you absolutely love Robbie Williams and love his music and everything about him, in which case you'll love the film as well. So I can recommend it on that basis as well.
Okay, but if anyone out there has those feelings, then Go see the Robbie-Williams-monkey film.
Yeah.
You've probably already seen it.
You've probably already seen it, but it's, I don't know, certainly the unusual hit of the very, very beginning of 2025.
Yeah. Early awards contender, no doubt.
We'll see.
Okay, and first up today, it's What If Season 3, the final year of this animated Marvel show, offering alternate takes on various characters and events from the sprawling MCU chronology. Narrated by the mysterious Watcher, voiced by Jeffrey Wright, who occasionally, and shockingly enough, especially towards the end of this final season, comes to the fore of the story. But the bulk of the season takes the form of an anthology of different stories from different alternate realities, offering scenarios such as what if the Avengers were big robots, what if the Avengers were cowboys, and what if Howard the Duck married a human woman. So, yep, we'll be getting to all that. This is, of course, an animated anthology, and as we, for some reason, do, we'll be doing a top 3 episodes towards the end of this review. But first, Alistair, what did you broadly think of this final season of What If?
So, I did enjoy it, watching it, but I do feel this is a good place for the What Ifs to stop at the end of this, in that they are starting to feel, I don't know, I was going to say samey, but obviously the shtick is that everyone's completely different. But I kind of feel that I've seen so many different variations on basically the same characters, and they obviously do kind of remain the same characters, that it's starting to feel like they are possibly running out of good ideas or ways to make this interesting. Yeah, I wasn't quite as excited by this season as the last season. There were probably more interesting ones in the last season, although there were some good ones in this season, which we will come to. But overall, good ending to a good Marvel show. Probably, leave it here.
I thought this was kind of low end all right. As you say, I thought it's a good time to end it because it is starting to feel a bit samey and slightly uninteresting. I feel like they seem to have slightly lost the ability to make these seem particularly interesting and remarkable for the most part. There's a lot of these where it's just a few characters going through some slightly different motions, and it doesn't feel like there's enough specificity, I don't know, to make it seem really interesting. I mean, there's only a couple of episodes here that fully fell flat for me. Unhelpfully, one of those is the very first one, the one I mentioned, What If the Avengers Were Robots? That did not do much for me. Apologies if that's your number one.
No, I would agree with you on that. That's one of the things I very much thought, which is, it was a bit of a weak opening, which actually, bizarrely, I didn't really watch them in the same order, because you can kind of watch them in any order. I did save the two climactic ones to the end, but I didn't start with that one, and actually that was probably a better place to start, because that first Power Rangers-esque giant robot one was very much What If the Avengers were in a generic episode of Power Rangers, and the thing about generic episode of Power Rangers is it's not actually that interesting.
But I watched them in order because I thought, it's the final season, they might be doing some sort of story arc thing, and they kind of were, but only really in the last few episodes. So I watched them in order, and as a result, had a bit of a rough start. But after that, they settled into a mostly alright tone, with a few of them spiking above that. I was slightly disappointed by the finale. Again, I'm going to talk about it now, because it's definitely not in my top 3. I was kind of hoping they'd hit the Watcher mythology a bit harder, and do something a bit more interesting, but it just felt a bit low effort. I don't know. We've got these all-powerful beings. What should we do with them? Let's have a lengthy sequence where some superheroes punch 3 bald men. Cool.
Yeah, it was very much, especially the final of the two-parter, was very much an extended action scene, and I see what they were doing with kind of bringing the spectacle at the end, but it was just, superheroes in space shoot kind of different coloured beams of light at each other, and they hadn't done much to establish exactly what the limits or strengths of the Watchers are, which they kind of seem to be capable of almost anything, which also means, well, how can you fight a being that can do anything, even if you are a being that can do anything? It kind of melts the mind if you think about it. But this is the problem with soft magic systems being the core of your narrative, which is that it's kind of hard to tell what the stakes are and what's going on, other than just, they're shooting coloured beams at each other and eventually good will triumph over evil.
I feel like I kind of preferred it if I tried to melt my mind a bit, to be honest, instead of just having them just punching each other against the generic Rocky backdrop. Obviously, I'm a superhero fan, so I'm not immune to some of the Easter eggs they throw in, but seeing Storm with Thor's hammer can only placate me for so long.
Yeah, it wasn't a particularly interesting finale. I mean, I don't know much about the lore of the Watcher and the comics that character is from, but they're not doing anything particularly interesting with it. They're just a kind of generically all-powerful sort of villain in this, or beings in this. I don't know if there was a more interesting take they could have done for their finale, but whatever there was, this wasn't it.
No, I mean, again, it's kind of a similar problem we have with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, isn't it? Like, the multiverse offers infinite possibilities, but what actually happens is quite dull and generic. And
also similar to some of the Doctor Strange villains, which is they are just kind of big cosmic sort of magical blobs of indefinite structure and power and origins, goals, wants, all those sort of things you need to get emotionally invested in a story, which is why the better ones find a servant character to be the villain, someone who's a bit more relatable. But again, they didn't go with that in this one, so it just is just a bit, a bit too abstract to be something you can really engage with.
Yeah, although for the record, both Doctor Strange films did have a better ending than this. Yeah, I do agree that with their decision that the death of a major character whose name I guess I shouldn't spoil is a good way to end the show. I think it's a fair way to bring it full circle. I wish they'd landed it a bit better. It wasn't the most amazing heroic sacrifice I've ever seen, but as an element that was fine. But as I say, I didn't feel they really nailed the execution.
Well, it's a way to make your finale, I don't know, have emotional impact, is to kill off a main character. People seem to be getting a bit tired with multiverse stories anyway. I mean, Lower Decks takes several quite broad and visceral pot shots at multiverses and how all this creativity produces generic different versions of the same thing, which we might come to in our Lower Decks chat later. But I don't know if the fact that this has come along at the time when people are really starting to fall out of love with multiverses, or if it's the fact that this kind of highlights the flaw with multiverses, which is you can do anything, but it has to link back to what we've already seen, and also the fans kind of want something similar to what they've already had, so here's some more with slight variation.
Yeah, I do feel like as we trudge towards the end of the multiverse saga, it's probably time to wrap this up for a bit. It's interesting to see them use some of the newer characters with mixed results sometimes. I thought the one with Robbie-Williams was a bit generic dystopia. Maybe not helped by me struggling to take Mysterio seriously as a despotic overlord, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one thing they have done, which is to make this interesting, is by introducing to the What If show, newer Marvel characters. I mean, that's how they managed to keep it fresh. So you've got Agatha, Ironheart, who you just mentioned.
Yeah, the Red Guardian appears in a couple of them. Shang-Chi. Yeah.
That's how they keep it fresh and interesting. Bring in new characters, which is, I guess, that's how Marvel keeps anything fresh and interesting. Bringing in new characters, keep moving forwards. We've discussed this before on the podcast. Yeah, and it does work here. Some of my favourite ones were not just, again, another take on characters we've seen before. Yeah, also still disappointed no Spider-Man.
Yeah, he did a bit in the 31st season of What If. I think he was in the Marvel Zombies one, but
yeah,
has since vanished, which obviously does disappoint me. Spider-Man continuity here represented only by Mysterio, really.
And a very brief appearance of Spider-Man in a montage right at the very end.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? Maybe
just to reinforce that he wasn't there by pointing it out.
I mean, he's getting his own cartoon in about 3 weeks, so I guess that's some compensation. But yeah, I must admit, I would have loved to see another Spider-Man focused What If, or at least a Spider-Man involving What If. But there we go. C'est la vie.
C'est la vie. Right, so
top threes.
Yeah, we've bid adieu to What If. Shall we pick up where we left off last episode and do some counting down? I think this is also what we did in our first episode of 2024 as well, because they did What If over Christmas last year.
Yep. So I hope you enjoyed the second and last occurrence of this annual tradition.
Right, so we will count down, each our 3 favourite What Ifs from season 3, and then I guess we'll try to arrive at a Universal MFV top 3. Nick, as our resident Marvel expert, do you want to go first with your first What If?
Sure, quick honourable mention for the penultimate episode, What If the Watcher Disappeared? Not my top 3, but was considered for it at one point. Had a fun sort of alternate Avengers lineup, some good sort of superhero bits. But yes, it was ultimately just about beaten out by What If 1872, the Wild West episode, is my number 3. This featured Shang-Chi and the Kate Bishop Hawkeye in a Wild West setting, doing battle with a mysterious villain. And yeah, this one didn't do anything massively gimmicky or spangly in some ways. It just had a solid aesthetic and a solid adventure story, a couple of twists towards the end which actually kind of landed. I thought this one had some particularly nice animation in it. Yeah, I enjoyed this solid adventure story.
Yeah, it was good. This one didn't make my top 3, but it nearly did, and I did like it. Yeah, again, actual original take in that, let's stick stuff in the Wild West. I mean, they did something similar in the last season with their Tudor Elizabethan era set one. It was some good gunslinging, and again, focused in on some newer characters to the MCU to keep it fresh and original. So yeah, not a bad episode. Right, my third favourite of these 8 is What If the Red Guardian stopped the Winter Soldier. I quite like this because I thought it was just a bit of a silly buddy comedy action movie, not too different to, Rush Hour or something like that. It's a sort of format that Marvel does well with. You've got one silly, quite pompous character in the Red Guardian, one kind of very dry, badass character in the Winter Soldier. They go on a little adventure around America, the Red Guardian doing silly things, the Winter Soldier having to occasionally step in and do some super soldiering. Yeah, I just thought it was kind of a good little movie condensed down to 30 minutes, a short film, if you will. So yeah, full marks for some Marvel comedy.
Yeah, no, this was a fun one. Probably if I'd had a number 5 in my list, this would probably have been it. Yeah, this was decent, solid Marvel entertainment. It did feel a bit too much like quite a few other things for my liking, but it was a decent rendition.
Yeah.
Right, so number 2 for me, another one with a couple of the newer characters in it. It's What If Agatha Went to Hollywood, featuring Agatha Harkness of All Along fame and Kingo, the Kumail Nanjiani character from The Eternals. And yeah, I enjoyed this. It's got some silly basic satire in it. It's had some big university stuff at the end. It's nice to see some of the newer characters in action. Kingo was one of the funnier, more memorable aspects of the Eternals movie. Yeah, it did remind me that I have really forgotten almost everything I know about the Eternals cosmology, but nonetheless, I quite enjoyed this episode.
Yeah, I like this episode as well. It was good. Agatha Harkness is a good character. Again, another one bringing in new characters to keep it fresh. Kathleen Han, obviously, great doing the voice role this time. Kumail Nanjiani, I think it might be pronounced. Yeah, again, from Silicon Valley and Eternals fame. He's very good in this as well. It's funny. It's got, some good action bits. To be honest, I kind of preferred this to the Eternals itself, actually. I thought this was probably a better little short film in that it kind of had some pizzazz to it.
Yeah, no, it had a little bit of spark to it. It was fun seeing Howard Stark and Jarvis again as someone who watched all of the Agent Carter show.
Yep, good stuff. So that was your number 2?
Yep.
My number 2 is, we've already mentioned it, What If the Emergence Destroyed Earth? I do take your criticism that it is a kind of bit of a dystopian, robot, AI-dominated, dark future. It's not perfect. Probably this is a sign of What If running out of steam But I did like this, partly, yeah, as a big cyberpunk nerd, this kind of tickled my fancy. I thought they had a good epic story, again, focusing in on less well-known characters. Ironheart in this episode and a few other less well-known characters was quite good. Yeah, and there was a kind of just, I don't know, I quite liked the chase story with the big fight at the end. That I thought it was just, again, kind of a nice movie compacted down. That was good fun.
Yeah, the action sequences in this were good. There were some nice bits of animation. I just didn't feel massively emotionally invested in it, and as I say, I struggle with the idea of Mysterio as a major villain, but that might just be my teenage years reading stories about him as a ridiculous Spider-Man villain catching up with me.
Yeah, I guess I don't have that because I really know him from that second Spider-Man film, so maybe he's more of a blank canvas that you can project different versions onto.
Possibly.
Yeah, the Vision villain I thought was quite good. Got across how sort of inhuman Vision can be when he's a terrifying villain. But yeah, that was some good sci-fi fun. Right,
okay.
Nick, drum roll time.
Yep, number one. My number one, and in some ways this seems inevitable, but my number one was the really daft, silly batshit episode, What If Howard the Duck Got Hitched? In which, as I mentioned earlier, Howard the Duck marries the supporting character Darcy from the 4 movies. They have a baby, which of course is an egg. It's best not to get into the biological mechanics of this. And then it turns out to be some sort of space duck egg messiah. Almost everyone in the Marvel Universe tries to kidnap it, and they have to go on the run in a sort of comedy chase sequence. I just liked this. This was just funny. There were some decent jokes, and it has the good sense of the escalating feeling of, oh god, what now? Which I always enjoy when they can pull it off. So yeah, this was the easy winner for me.
Yeah, this is a funny one. It didn't make my top 3. It is very funny. It's very silly. It's good to see Marvel not taking this whole thing too seriously. I guess it didn't make my top 3. I think just for my taste, possibly just a bit too silly. But that maybe says more about my humorlessness than the show itself. It was quite silly, and I don't know, maybe this is the right home for Howard the Duck in this silly animated show rather than in the cinema.
I think the one attempt they made did suggest that might be the case, yeah.
Yeah. But no, this was good fun.
Okay.
Right.
What's your number?
And my number 1, yes, we've already mentioned it. It's been in Nick's list. It is What If Agatha Went to Hollywood? Yeah. I just enjoyed this. I watched this one first, so I don't know if it's the opposite of recency bias or, a strong first impression. But yeah, other than the stuff we mentioned, like the good voice acting and the interesting use of the Eternals cosmology, I just kind of liked the classic Hollywood stuff in it. I thought, yeah, the dance sequences were beautifully animated, weaving together kind of MGM musicals from the golden era of Hollywood with Bollywood musicals and dancing, and yeah, kind of bringing them together. I just thought, yeah, it looked spectacular. Great fun story, some spectacular dance scenes in this one, as opposed to spectacular fight scenes, which most of the others had. So yeah, full marks for just being creative and bringing the razzle-dazzle.
Yeah, no, when this show does something a bit off-kilter and actually lands it, it can be good, Yes, the mech episode was rubbish, but the Agatha episode and the Howard the Duck episode were good, so, it can happen. In fact, to be honest, the 3 I've chosen are basically the 3 most out-of-the-ordinary, silly gimmick episodes, which maybe suggests what I'm after from this show.
Yeah, and the kind of the ones when they try to do something serious. The giant robot one was trying to take itself pretty seriously, in this kind of world destroyed by the evil version of the Hulk or whatever it was supposed to be. Whereas I guess kind of that would have been better. Maybe they just really lent into the silliness of giant robots fighting or something like that.
Yeah.
Right, so unified top 3. Well, I'll give you the duck egg one because that is funny.
Well, number one's going to be Agatha then.
Yeah, because it's
your number 1 and my number 2, and then we both
give you the Howard the Duck for being silly.
I mean, it's up to you. We both mentioned 1872, didn't we?
Yes, we did. That would have been my number 4 had we done a top 4.
Okay, so do you want Agatha and then 1872 and then Howard, or?
Yeah, I'll stand by that. Again, as you said, they're kind of the gimmicky, interesting ones rather than the kind of chronology ones.
Well, it is my top 3 reordered, so it's hard for me to really complain.
Fair enough, yeah. And I do accept your criticism of what if the emergence destroyed Earth.
For the record, I would be happy with the Red Guardian one as the non-existent 4th place. Or do you want to put the Red Guardian into 3rd?
Let's put the Red Guardian into the...
Okay, so Howard, Agatha, Red Guardian.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's do it.
Right, cool, there you go. There's your top 3/4 episodes to go watch.
Yeah, so if you've only got 3 episode time, if you've only got an hour and a half for 8 episodes, just watch those 3. Dispense with the rest.
Yeah, you'll be fine. Okay, and our next animated final season, it's Lower Decks, Season 5, the final season of the Star Trek spin-off set on one of the less glamorous, less exciting spaceships in Starfleet, focusing on a group of lower deck crew members, led by Beckett Mariner and Brad Boimler, who are slowly rising up the ranks of the organisation they so love. Although, to be honest, it's Season 5, and our heroes are slowly becoming maybe a bit less lower decks, a bit less carefree and irresponsible. Could this spell the end of the show? Well, spoilers, yes. We've both seen this. Alistair, what did you think of this final season?
Well, the consistently good show that's been consistently good across the previous 4 seasons has a consistently good 5th season and consistently ends well. It's hardly an attention-grabbing headline, but that is kind of my take in a nutshell. It's still funny. There's still warm characters that we like. They're kind of a bit silly, but also very likeable. There's a lot of good Star Trek jokes in there, but you don't really have to know loads about Star Trek to get them, and there's plenty of jokes that just work if you don't know much about Star Trek. So yeah, the sense of humour really lands. I like the kind of character journeys from this, which we could get into more, how they clearly have shown some growth in the characters. It's not just one of those sitcoms that just resets at the end of every episode. So yeah, I mean, it bowed out on a high. 5 seasons, 50 episodes, it's a pretty good run.
Yeah, I have a pretty similar opinion. I thought it went out on a good run. I thought it's always been pretty solid. Like a lot of sitcoms and comedies, it maybe took a few episodes at the beginning to find its voice, but I think once it did, it's been pretty consistent for a few years now. Other seasons maybe seemed a bit funnier, but this one still has the good hangout sitcom vibe. The jokes mostly land. You just like spending time with the characters. There's a steady arc of character growth, which I've enjoyed. I think some animated comedies perhaps end up falling foul of just running in place forever. Like, I've watched, I think, 6 seasons of Rick and Morty, and I've just not bothered watching the 7th because it's just starting to feel a bit samey. But yeah, this show, the characters have developed a bit, and I can buy that we're wrapping this incarnation up because they're just maybe no longer lower decks. Not that they couldn't have just carried on with an incongruous title, but still, yeah. No, this was a good final season, bringing everything to a nice, warm, graceful end. I enjoyed it.
I mean, similar to like Ghosts, so I respect a show that basically each episode's tight, well written, funny, good characters, and then they do a good run of series and stops. Overall, Ghosts was probably a funnier show, but this was still, really, really good. The fact they bow out on a high, and I assume resisted the pressure to keep making it because it's one of the few bits of Star Trek media that everyone can agree on, from casual Star Trek fans to the Trekkers and the Trekkies, that this is actually good and everyone likes it.
I vaguely gather from the vague hints I've picked up that they would actually have liked to keep making it and were sort of cancelled against their will by Paramount, but I don't know. It's not the end of the world. I mean, unlike a lot of sitcoms on their 5th or 6th season, I don't necessarily feel that they'd run out of steam. I would probably have happily watched another season. Conversely, I just watched the last season of What We Do in the Shadows, and I felt that didn't end badly, but I did feel that the characters and the situation had more or less run their course, and I was not sorry to see it stop.
What We Do in the Shadows does very much have the issue of always looping back to the same place and keeping the characters in the same emotional state. There's even one season when they all leave the house for various reasons at the end of the season in a big climax, and then, within the end of the first or possibly second episode of the next season, everyone's back in the same house and the relationships are re-established the way they've always been. It did suffer from the, we really can't move beyond this basic premise sort of thing. And this show has injected some kind of momentum by having like a vague arc plot associated with the characters, such as, their rise, their growth. Like, in this season, there's some good character growth. Mariner is much more responsible now and less of a tearaway. Boimler's grown in confidence. Tendy's addressed her past as an Orion and has recommitted herself to Starfleet. There is this kind of sense of growth. Mariner has a better relationship with her mother, the captain, and that keeps the show fresh and exciting. The fact that the characters change and evolve, there is this sense of, not just the same things happening over and over, sitcom style, or the same characters being put together. But I think whenever you put characters into motion like this is pretty much a point I'm stealing from John York, who wrote Life on Mars and EastEnders, and a lot of plot-based stuff, that once you put characters into motion, they do ultimately have to come to a rest. There has to be an end at some point, especially if you don't just get cancelled at a point mid-story. And this seems like a good a point as any to leave the characters when they've grown, they've risen through the ranks a bit, they've addressed some of their character flaws and grown as people. I agree with you, I could have watched another season where they, grow further and take on new challenges and continue to rise through the ranks, but it does ultimately have to resolve itself at some point, and I feel this is a good a point as any to resolve it.
Well, yeah, the thing is, rather than it being a straight sitcom, it's also a Star Trek show, which means there's some degree of actual action and stakes and characters triumphing over adversity. It can't just be about them, embarrassingly humiliating themselves every week. Obviously, it sometimes sometimes is, but the overall trajectory of the show is towards them actually advancing and improving.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the sci-fi plot development is taken seriously and treated as like a serious plot, and there's that sense, and also it is kept fresh by the fact it's a Star Trek show the way most Star Trek shows keep it fresh, and it's at a different planet each week, a different location, different guest characters, different situations, keeps it fresh and original, which is one of the reasons why it's managed to stay again fresh after 5 seasons of 10 episodes each. And again, it really is a marvel they managed to keep Ghost that exciting and fresh with one location and the same group of characters. But anyway, I did like also the arc plot to this season, a bit more in the background than the last season, but with the cracks from all other universes opening up, and then and that result again with the 2-part finale that worked really well.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. I enjoyed the inevitable snark about multiverses, but also the inclusive, positive conclusion about them. The point at which the other Brad actually points out that multiverses aren't always bad or always boring, even if we have started to become bored of them.
Well, yeah, it shows the range of human potential, all the different things that humans have done in all the different universes. I mean, I felt that was very Star Trek, that moment, that kind of optimistic spin on the future and space and human potential. I've mentioned it several times in this podcast whenever we discuss Star Trek, but you do have to remember the radicalism of Star Trek in the 1960s, when it first debuted in 1966. A show in the future, there's a white captain, there's a black woman, there's a Russian, there's a Japanese man, and there's an alien, and they all get along and it's fine. They don't argue, they don't fall out. It's a very optimistic vision of the future and a very optimistic vision of humanity. And that's your kind of essence of Star Trek. And some shows lose that and they get lost in lore or trying to do a modern version of Star Trek. But that moment of warmth, I felt, was very quintessential Star Trek, the optimism. So, that was a nice note to have towards the end. And I think in the final episode, they had some of that as well, which is, it's good that despite the silliness and bigger moments, they still kind of have at the core the essence of what it is to be a Star Trek show.
Well, yeah, I think a lot of people, when this show was announced, expected it to be sort of snarkily rolling its eyes at Star Trek conventions and the optimism of Star Trek, but it's, as many other people have said, probably the most Star Trek of all the recent Star Trek shows, including buying fully into the warmth and optimism.
Yeah, despite the fact it's an animated sitcom, it's kind of nailed the tone the best. I mean, this is why everyone agrees they likes it. I never met anyone who doesn't like it, who's seen the show. I'm sure there's someone out there who doesn't like it. There's someone who doesn't like everything. But it does really kind of nail the Star Trek tone and things like that. And like I say, it takes the sci-fi plot seriously. Some of them are sillier than others, but at least the arc plot is kind of taken seriously as a genuine thriller stroke scientific problem they have to resolve. And it is quite epic conclusion to build up to, as well as throwing in bits of humour as well. So yeah, they managed to do that job of having a serious dramatic plot and also still being consistently funny as well.
Yeah, I also enjoyed, there's a few sort of slightly format breaking episodes this year which I all quite enjoyed. There's the one where the Upper Decks crew are the main cast, which I thought was fun. There's the multiverse one you mentioned. There's another one which is mostly about 2 Klingon brothers on a farm, or at least the first half or so of it is. That was fun.
Yeah, I liked all of those as well. Again, they kept it fresh by breaking the format a bit in this latest season. I did especially like the one about the Upper Decks. Yeah, they seem to reveal that, it is every ship in Starfleet that just always goes on crazy adventures. They managed to cram about 4 or 5 Star Trek episodes worth of plot into one 40-minute format-breaking episode, which was an impressive piece of writing, if nothing else.
Yeah, with a lot of self-awareness and silliness, but as ever, without being snarky about it. It's good. They're all good. I had a really good time with this. I'm, as I said earlier, sort of sorry to see it go.
Yeah.
Vaguely nice to see it end on a high note, at least.
Yeah, the Klingon Blood Wine Farm one was good as well. Again, good to focus in on the Klingons, sort of humanise them, to use an awkward phrase, a bit more, which was nice. I also really like the one with the planet where time moves slower, and they beam down for a very short mission, but due to food being spilt on the console, means that they're about 2 minutes late being picked up, which obviously translates into about 4 years or something on the surface. They get caught up in this silly rivalry between two of the main characters and this kind of slightly odd medieval-esque civilization on the planet. I thought that one was both funny and kind of sweet and had a good plot, so that was a good bit of writing.
Yeah, that was definitely a sort of a classic sci-fi Star Trek plot. I think Mariner does at one point acknowledge that she's basically in a classic Star Trek plot at this point, but with the lower deck silliness added of them spilling prawn cocktail on the console or whatever it was.
That was a good episode, yeah. And I did also enjoy the early episodes with Tendy's adventures as an Orion pirate. That was also quite good, yeah. Some good jokes, the whole bit about, the Orion who just wants to do interpretive dance or something like that. Yeah, some good silliness and also some good tense drama in that one as well.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that bit was kind of inevitable sitcom undoing of the previous year's cliffhanger. But again, this show manages to pull it off. It lasts a few episodes. It feels like they've grown. It gets them all back together in time for the end of the show.
Lovely stuff.
So yeah, I mean, to be honest, I feel like most Star Trek fans have already watched and had an opinion about Lower Decks, but if you haven't for some reason, then yeah, it's finished now. It's really good.
Yeah, and I think this is accessible to people who aren't huge Star Trek fans. I mean, I guess almost everyone on the planet is aware of the basic setup of Star Trek. The space adventuring, the big characters, the big villains and species. So the background you just absorb from popular culture is all you need really to dive into this show. You probably get more out of it if you know at least a bit about Star Trek, but although I've seen a lot of it, I haven't meticulously watched every single episode, and there were definitely references I didn't get, but I still found it funny.
Yeah, I mean, I'm much less of a Star Trek fan than Alistair. There are definitely many references I didn't get, but I was still able to very much enjoy it. And yeah, I guess we've gone from having 4 Star Trek shows to having just Strange New Worlds, so there we go.
Well, there's also that Star Trek film that's coming out this year, the one that's straight to Paramount Plus, so...
Oh yeah, that's true. More Star Trek from us within the next month or so. Get excited.
That's all we have time for this episode. If you have enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please leave us a review, as it helps other people find out about the show. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can hear other episodes of the podcast, bonus audio content, and short written pieces by Nick and myself, such as our summaries of film and TV in 2024.
And if you enjoy all that stuff, why not follow us on social media, where you can find us under Moderate Fantasy Violence or MFV Podcast on various platforms, with all the latest updates about when exactly we're recording and if and when the episodes have come out. And you can also follow me as Nick Bryan with a little red cartoon avatar, that's Brian with a Y, on various social medias, mostly Instagram and Blue Sky at this point, but others do also get posts. And you can find more general information about my self-published comics at nickbryan.com.
You can find more from me on Twitter, Blue Sky and Instagram by searching for Alistair Ball, or you can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, or find my theatre reviews at everythingtheatre.com. Or you can join us in 2 weeks for another episode of this podcast, where we will be diving into Roger Eggers' meticulously crafted Nosferatu vampire story, and then we will be falling out with our brother in A Real Pain, starring Kieran Culkin and Jesse Eisenberg. Join us in 2 weeks' time to find out what we thought of those. Until then, goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, it wasn't a particularly interesting finale. I mean, I don't know much about the lore of the Watchmen. Sorry, I'll start that again.
Alan Moore would be very upset at what you just said.
I know, so you feel free to clip that and hide it somewhere to threaten me with at a later date.